Nu ska vi alldeles snart få lyssna till en föreläsning på engelska.
Ja. Och då kan det vara bra att man liksom vrider sin hjärna lite till det engelska språket, tänkte vi. Så då tänkte jag så här, om ni kunde säga efter mig bara nu så att vi liksom tune in to English here. Så Betty bought a bit of butter.
Bit of butter.
But the bit of butter Betty bought was bitter. But the bit of butter Betty bought was bitter. So Betty bought a better bit of butter. So Betty bought a better bit of butter. Bra, och nu tar vi det helt ihop, i alltihop. Ja, okej. Betty bought a bit of butter. But the bit of butter Betty bought was bitter. So Betty bought a better bit of butter. Klockrent. Underbart. Ja, applådera er själva.
So now we're all tuned into English. Hör ni mig? Ja. Great.
Can you hear
me? Can you hear me? Great. Thank you. So now, give a warm and welcoming hand for Dr. Anita Franklin from Children's Society in England.
Thank you. Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay, thank you. I don't know quite how to follow that. I can't even say Betty bitter bought of butter. And I couldn't even understand what you were saying, but the improvisation was so good. I knew what you were doing, so that's great. Okay, so first of all, I just want to apologise that this is in English. I'm afraid Swedish isn't on the national curriculum in Britain. In fact, no languages are on the national curriculum in Britain. And as I was flying over, I got out my guidebook, and it's written by a very famous travel writer. And the first line said, "Don't worry about not speaking Swedish, because everybody in Sweden speaks better English than the English." So I feel comfortable now. Okay, so what I've been asked to do is to come and speak to you about participation of children, disabled children, young people, and children with complex communication needs, and our experiences and what is happening in England. Okay, just to, if you could give me some feedback. I am from London, so I do everything fast. I don't know if anyone's ever been to London, but everything is fast there. And I speak fast as well. So maybe if when my eye line is that ledge there, if I start to speed up, because I get very excited about this and passionate about this subject, you please start to wave wildly at me, or start a Mexican wave and go that way, and I'll try and slow down. But please do let me know if it's not clear what I'm saying. Okay, so I am a researcher. My background is academic research in social policy, and I used to work at the University of York, where I have done most of the research that I'm going to be talking to you about. I actually moved to the Children's Society a couple of years ago, and they're a voluntary organisation that works across England. We have 90 projects that work directly with children and young people, not just disabled children. We have a lobbying and campaigning element to us, and we try to influence and inform policy. So I guess probably the equivalent here would be, I saw the guys from Save the Children, so we're kind of an organisation a bit like Save the Children. We work in the same sorts of ways. Okay, so outline of the presentation I'm going to give you. Just a brief overview of how participation has come to be defined in England, possibly quite similar to how it is here. I want to share with you why we feel participation is important, and why people have signed up to this in quite large numbers in the UK. And I think probably by you already being here, you're already committed to participation. I don't think you would be here if you weren't. But maybe it might present some arguments that you can use with other people to convince them to involve children and young people in decision making. And to look at the barriers to participation that we've faced in the UK and have tried to overcome. And then to share with you some of our experiences what appears to be working in England to involve these young people in decision making. So is that so far English all right? Yeah? No waving? No? Okay. Right, so definitions of participation. The way that participation has developed in England has meant that there's been no one agreed definition. So what's actually happened is it means lots of different things to lots of different people. And what that has done is created almost an opportunity for people to say that they're involving people, children, young people in decision making. But actually, when you look closer, that they aren't. It's what we call tokenistic. They aren't really involving young people in decision making. So I've used one particular quotation there from Boyd and Nenyu, where they have said that obviously participation can be simply taking part, being present, being involved or consulted, but alternatively it's about this transfer of power, so that the children, young people have influence on the decisions and their views are taken into consideration. And that's the bit that I'm interested in, and the way that participation has come to develop in the UK. It's that transfer of power and how children, young people can be involved in decision making. But in practice, it means a vast thing, a vast range of decision making. So it can be very small decisions about what a disabled young person might wear, what they might eat, or what they might drink. And I've witnessed practice in the UK, probably the same here maybe, where for more severely disabled young people, even those decisions are taken away from them and adults decide all those issues. And then we also have practice in the UK where disabled young people are involved in really big decisions about which school they go to, which college they go to, and it's that spectrum, continuum of participation that has developed very rapidly in the UK, and which I will talk about. Okay. So participation has come to mean sort of two camps, as it were, of different types of focus of participation. On the one hand, it can be those decisions that children, young people make about their own personal lives, the things that are going on with them as an individual. So that could be about their own care, the services they're receiving, or particularly a big thing in the UK at the moment is around transition planning. I know there's a stand out there of a project. I spoke to a nice lady telling me about the transition project. And that can be about deciding what happens to a young person as they move into adulthood, where they go to college, where they go to, where they're going to live. That's a big issue in the UK and something we're trying to improve on and involve young people in that process. And then the other side of it, which has developed massively in the UK, is around decision making, which relates to children and young people as a group, what we've called collective or public decision making. So this says, the way it's developed, it's very much on a sort of can be on a local level, but we also have on a national level quite large numbers of disabled young people being involved in the formulation, the review or implementation of policy, but also of services as well. And it's those two areas really that have developed quite rapidly in the UK. And there are examples of that happening all over. And it's not just in social care, it's not just in education or health, it's across the board. So you think of all the aspects of children's lives that they could be involved in decision making, or services that they're involved in, transport, local planning. We have examples of that going on all over the UK now. So just moving on to some theories of participation. I wouldn't be a researcher if I didn't have theories. Okay, so sort of going back, a quick history lesson. Back in the 1990s and early part of this century, in the UK, and I think possibly elsewhere as well, we became completely obsessed with these ladders of participation. Now, I don't know if you're probably quite familiar with those here. We just became obsessed with the fact that it was like some sort of utopia, or the perfect participation was this highest level of participation. And And you weren't really doing participation if you were somewhere in the middle. It wasn't okay to do that. You had to reach the top. And although the authors didn't actually want that, they didn't want us to judge people on these levels of participation. That's the way it kind of became developed. And I guess I would argue that I think what that meant was, particularly for disabled children and young people, it didn't create a space where we could start to discuss their participation. Because I think, I'll put the next slide on. Because if you look at sort of rung 7, for instance, young people lead and initiate action. So it's kind of quite a high level of involvement of young people in decision making. I think what happened was that we become so obsessed with young people leading things, it didn't create the space for disabled young people who might have severe learning disabilities or cognitive impairments or complex communication needs. They might not be, have the ability to lead a project or even want to lead a project. So it almost froze us, I think, in the UK in thinking about different ways that young people could be involved. So that was a very popular ladder of participation, Hart's ladder. And as you can see, as you go up the ladder, then young people become more involved and have a greater transfer of power in the decision-making process. So, yeah, that was criticised quite heavily, although Roger Hart didn't want us to see it as a hierarchy. And then along came Harry Shearer's model, which was, he called it a pathway to participation. And for me, I found that much simpler to understand. And for me, researching disabled children and young people, I just found that this was more applicable as well. I could relay that to the young people I was working with complex communication needs. And so what he did with this pathway was he encouraged us to start at 1, to look at what we're already doing, and then to sort of examine and identify the steps we could take to reach the next one. So it's more like a pathway. It wasn't such a hierarchy as the other ones had been. And for me, why I particularly like this, it's simple to understand, I think, but also, I guess, because I was working with children with more complex needs, even reaching sort of stage 1 is quite difficult to achieve, or also to get people to listen to children with complex communication needs. So actually to have it recognised that stage 1's okay, and we can do that, that was, for me, quite an empowering thing. Okay. But then I came across the model that Alderson and Montgomery produced. They originally produced this for involving very young children, sort of 5 years, 6 years old, in health and health decisions. But for me, I found this applied to the group of young people that I was working with, and for the reason being that this number 1, being informed. When I was doing my research looking at participation, I found that many of the young people just didn't have any information or experiences of being involved in any sort of decision making. So then if they aren't informed and they've practiced how to make decisions, then it's very difficult for them to express a view, make choices, and be involved in decision making. So for me, I found that being informed part has to be the first stage, providing accessible information to give young people an experience and opportunity to participate. And then after I'd finished the research I was doing, I found that actually that model needed a bit of refinement as well, because what I was finding was with the young people that I was working with communication needs, many of them didn't have access to their communication aid, their tool that they were using in school, outside of school, or they didn't have people who could understand their communication method. And if they haven't got access to the tools or someone who can understand how they communicate, then there's no way they can be involved in a decision. So it was almost that needed to come first, and then have information and be able to learn how to make decision makings before you could go on to participation in decision making on a bigger scale. So for me, that provided the framework that I needed, and we now use that to evaluate the participation work that we go out and research. And it's a way to just examine what's going on and to see whether that those levels and those experiences that the young people are having mean that real participation is occurring. Okay. So I think what we've got to now, particularly in the UK, is a position where it's almost the ladders are put to one side, which is great. We've sort of unfrozen ourselves and we can get on with it, which is quite, a good position to be in. So it's now generally agreed, really, that participation should be determined by the circumstances, the type of decision making, the abilities and the interests of the children and young people that are taking part. So, ladders have gone, but they can have their place to evaluate what's going on. Okay, so why participation is important. For a large number of years in the UK, we had to fight and lobby and pressure in order for participation to occur and to get people on board with this. It was a small group to start off with that lobbied for disabled children and young people's participation, and there was a lot of argument as to why this should happen and how it can happen. And so it was very often broken down into these different areas and different reasons why participation was important. So legal reasons, political and social reasons. So obviously there's children's rights. There are some laws, a few, that are a requirement for children and young people to be involved in decision making. There was an argument that it did improve services. If you provide a service that someone has taken a decision in or has designed, then it's more likely that the service might meet their needs. That was the argument. The government, the UK government, was particularly interested in participation because they felt that it would enhance democratic processes and get young people involved in politics and be interested in that, and also to promote children's protection. We're now starting in the UK to build evidence to support these arguments. Before, they were mainly just arguments, but now there is starting to be an evidence base, particularly that participation leads to better services. And I think if you can prove that link, for us, that was a very powerful thing. If you improve services and hopefully save money, that's even an added bonus as well. So there's starting to be evidence to support that as well. And I think really to say as well that although it's not on there, I think the real reason why participation is important is because actually young people have really good ideas. And they have, they think of different ways of doing things and exciting ways of doing things. And I think as adults, we become very reserved and very sort of blinkered as to what can be done. And often young people turn that upside down and want to do different things. So I think that's another good reason. And I have to say it's actually fun as well. So that's why I think it's important. I think it's fair to say that our last government, not this one, our last one, had fully signed up to participation of all young people in decision making. And as an example of this, when there was any new policy developed, any new services developed for children and young people, they always insisted on consulting with young people before implementing or developing the policy. And then if the policy went ahead, they evaluated it, fully involving young people within the evaluation. So there was a real commitment from beginning to end of the process that young people should be involved in decision making. They didn't always match that with money to do that, and so they did rely on a lot of the voluntary sector to do it, but there was a commitment there. I don't think that's matched with our new government, but we shall wait and see what happens with that one. Okay. So, I work for a children's rights organisation, so I would probably be sacked and lose my job if I didn't mention the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. I'm sure you're all aware of this, but they pay my salary, so I have to say it. Okay, so you're probably quite aware of Article 12. The UK government signed up to the UNCRC in 1991, and that was when our participation mushroomed. But I just wanted to mention Article 13 because we've come to use that more often to fight for children's rights. Article 12 is about enabling a young person to express their views freely in matters affecting them. But for me, Article 13 is also important because that grants children the right to seek, receive and disseminate information in a variety of formats. And for me, that was important because it gave me a tool to argue that children with complex communication needs who might not use speech, for children who don't use written language so well, that enabled them and gave them a right to express themselves in different ways, whether that be art or drama or all sorts of different ways. It gave them a right. So that's something that I think we often forget, Article 13. And of course, we've now got the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, which includes children, young people, and includes the right to participation. So quite important things. Tick. I've done what I have to do. Talk children's rights. I can go home and still have a job. Okay, so the other reason that participation took off as well in the UK was the fact that there was a lot of research undertaken which started to compare what parents and carers and children thought about the same things. And what started to emerge was that parents didn't always know what their children wanted or always were the best sort of advocate or the best person to speak for children, young people. And this is not about criticising parents. The vast majority do a fantastic job and obviously do speak and speak up for their rights of their children. But I think we probably do need to be aware that sometimes children's views do differ from their parents. And some research that my colleagues did at the University of York found that children and young people prioritise different things, different aspects of services as being important. So I think it's just a reminder that parents aren't always fully involved in children and young people's lives, so they don't always know what's happening at school, what's happening out of school. So that was quite an important piece of research that also helped us to fight more for children and young people's views. Okay. I guess if that hasn't convinced you why participation is important, I actually currently work with a group of disabled young people who I'm training to be young researchers. And they're aged from 11 to 21. They've got a wide range of needs and abilities and impairments. And when they found out I was coming to Sweden to talk about participation, they wanted to send messages to you. So this is the messages from the group of disabled young people that I work with who are researchers. They're actually researching participation in services, so decision-making in services by other disabled young people. And they're just learning about evaluation techniques at the moment. They're going to go out across the UK and start to evaluate some participation in action. So I'll just give you a second to read through those messages from them while I grab a drink. I'm quite thirsty. So if I haven't convinced you and they haven't convinced you that participation is important, I've got one last card to play. Okay, this is safeguarding and probably child protection. I'm not quite sure of the word that you might use here. So this is protecting children from abuse, from bullying. And And again, I don't want to portray disabled children and young people as victims or as powerless, but I'm ashamed to say that in the UK we still do have vast amounts of bullying of disabled children. We do have the scandals of abuse in residential care. And so I think if there's no other reason to involve children and young people in decisions and empower them to have a voice and to give them the tools to be able to speak out if they're not happy with something, then this for me is it. And I think those statistics are quite shocking still. Even more shocking is that they're actually US studies. They're studies from the US of A. I couldn't find any UK research into this area at all, which just goes to show how little prioritised it is. So they're 3.4 times more likely to be abused than non-disabled children, and 31% of disabled children are abused compared to 9% among non-disabled child population. And the research around bullying is that if disabled children and young people are bullied, the severity of it is more likely to be, is going to be a higher level of severity. So if there's no other reason, if we can't give young people the opportunity to speak out when they're being bullied, then I think we're failing really. Okay. So our research in the UK into the barriers to participation, and I'm guessing they're probably not that dissimilar to the barriers that you faced here, so I probably won't dwell on them too long. But we face barriers in the fact that many professionals, practitioners still do, unfortunately, believe that children who don't use speech cannot express a view. I think there's still an underestimation of a child's ability to communicate if they don't use speech. I think we do still have negative attitudes to children, that they are incompetent, maybe they need protecting, so they shouldn't be exposed to difficult decisions and being involved in complex issues, although I would argue against that one. Unfortunately, we do still have the dominance of the medical model of disability. So that's about seeing only the deficits, what's wrong with the child cannot communicate, rather than seeing the barriers, looking at ourselves, what barriers are the children facing to being involved, how can we overcome those barriers? Often disabled children are denied opportunities to be involved in everyday decision making, so they don't learn the skills or have the confidence to be involved. So people think that they can't do it. There's definitely a lack of knowledge of accessible methods to involve children, and lack of access to communication, as I've already mentioned. I think there was a real reliance on mechanisms, and I think particularly in the UK we become very obsessed with bureaucratic systems and recording things and measuring things particularly within our social care and health settings. So everything involved a meeting, and meetings aren't necessarily good places for children and young people to be. For us they're boring, so for a child and young people to be involved in these meetings, it was almost we had to have meetings. We couldn't think of a different way of involving children without sitting around a table. And those things are inaccessible. And I think it's fair to say that this takes time and resources and training that wasn't always available. And I had one particularly interesting conversation with a local councillor, so someone who works in our municipal councils, about how you could involve disabled children in deciding how to spend money around services in their local area. And he answered me by saying, well, if we invite children to talk about money, all they'll want to do is spend it on going to Disneyland. So that would be nice, but I'm sure that's probably not what they would say. So it's kind of this, it created a barrier. It was like, well, we can't do that. But of course we wouldn't give any child the opportunity to just waste loads of money on going to Disneyland. So it was a bit of a barrier that he'd put up there. So just briefly go over some work that Thomas and O'Kane did as well. They were based down at the University of Swansea in Wales, and they particularly looked at this idea about attitudes and how that affected the participation of disabled children. And I just think that little table just very easily and summarises how, if you've got a positive attitude, you can work with the child to find ways and means for them to understand, for you to understand themselves and for them to express themselves. And if you're creative and you're determined and you want to try and do this, then there are ways that it can happen. It's just a simple little table, I think, that illustrates the clear difference. Okay. So I don't want to dwell on the barriers too much. We're probably sick of barriers. Okay. So, what works? I'd argue that there's no one way and there's no one right way. The way it's developed in the UK has been that, as you can see, there's a long list there of different ways and methods and mechanisms that disabled children and young people have been involved in decision making. So right across the UK, most local councils, or probably municipal councils as you call them here, have disabled young people's youth councils, youth parliaments, reference groups, advisory groups that are fully involved in decisions that are going on at a local level. As I've already mentioned, disabled children and young people involved in development of policy and guidance by our government and involved in campaigning activities. We have examples of disabled young people producing accessible information for other young people. There has been a complaints procedure that's now rolled out across our residential homes, and the complaints procedure is fully accessible. So the young people use symbols and ways and means of raising problems or concerns if they're they're based in a residential setting. Okay. Most of the research and evaluation of services that we do now around disabled children and young people seek to involve young people within that. And I would say that's at all levels. I'm very fortunate to work with this group of young people who are being trained to be co-researchers. And so we're going out together as equals to evaluate participation practice across the UK. And those young people are guiding that project. They're making the decisions about what we do and which projects we're going to evaluate. I think it's just a great example of how young people can be involved. We've also got young people now, disabled young people who are trained as inspectors of services. So they're going out with the inspectors to inspect our school system, inspect our residential care system, to see whether it's working for disabled young people. And that's quite an empowering thing to watch, to see disabled young people interviewing other ones about the services they're receiving. It's fantastic. I'd say in most areas now, disabled young people are involved in the recruitment of social workers who work with them. Examples of young people being involved in the commissioning or funding of services. We also have a role called an advocate, which I'll come on to because I think that's quite a different sort of role that maybe you've not got here. And it's fair to say that across the country now, children and young people are fully involved in their assessments, their reviews of their care, child protection meetings, education plans. It's almost become the norm that they should be involved, and there's an onus on people to find a way to involve them in the process. Just to share with you, we have something called the Disability Toolkit website, which it's great to see some of the resources that are actually on the toolkit outside. And this is a website that is free to access. You can download things from, and people upload their practice, their examples to this website, and it's free. You can just go on there. I appreciate it's in English, but you'll be fine with that. And you can. It's a way to look at what other people are doing, and saves you what we call reinventing the wheel, spending lots of time thinking about how you might work with a child when there's already examples on there of how that's been used. So that's something we've got from the UK, but I mean, it's fantastic. The number of people now that use that and use the tools and the methods on there, it's brilliant. So if you haven't got that one, if you haven't got a similar website here, I'd strongly recommend trying to find some money or something to get that developed. Okay. So as I said, some of the resources that are outside are on that website and are free to download. Okay. Something else that I'm kind of quite proud of, really, the Children's Society developed the Askability website for children. And as far as I know, this was the first symbol-based, accessible website for disabled young people. So on there is, we call them widget symbols. I don't know if you have the same here. But so the young people who use widget have a website that's fully accessible to them. They can go on there, they get information, they get gossip of the TV, they get all the access to the information that's on, you know, a number of websites other young people are accessing, but it's available to them in widgets, symbols. And the exciting bit about that, there's a new part to that called Chatability, which is a social networking site for young people using widget symbols. So that's something, I'm not sure you've got that in Sweden, I don't know, but that's something I'm quite proud of that we've been developing and trying to keep going. And young people designed it, they put the information on there as well, so they're fully in charge of that website. I think it'd be boring if we did it. Okay. Just to share with you a few more examples of some of the methods that are quite commonplace in the UK. We have talking mats, but I've actually seen that on a number of the stands outside, so probably best to go and see that on the stands. They're able to explain it a lot better than I can, but these are the ones with the little symbols and the mats, and you can move them around. And I've used that continually through the research on so many different subjects with children and young people. And it's just a really easy, simple way for young people to express themselves about different activities. I think talking mats might have started in Scotland, and there's now a lot of research evidence out there that's showing that it's a reliable method. You can use it in different situations and different circumstances and with lots of different children. So it's a tried and tested method, really. Something else we have, I'm not sure if you're aware of, it's something called the mosaic approach, which was developed for young children, but was adapted by one of my colleagues at University of York to work with children with autistic spectrum disorders. And it literally is a mosaic, so it's bits of information put together to make up a whole picture. So what they were doing was using talking mats, interviewing other people, observations, spending time with the young person, going on tours with the young people to get so different views and aspects of their life to make up one full picture of the young people. So that's another method that has really taken off in working particularly with children who struggle to communicate. The other thing we have used quite extensively is communication passports. And I think there's one out there as well, the About Me guide, which is basically a same sort of thing, communication passport. And this is ideal for children with complex communication needs because it's a small booklet that the young person can put together with an adult, and it contains all the important information that they want to share with other people. And it's a way to start to facilitate interaction. So it will include information like how they want to communicate, their likes, their dislikes. And it's just a way when the young person goes to a new area or meets new people, it's a way that they can just get that crucial information over to that other person. And when they're put together well, it just presents the young person in a very positive light. Rather than a negative way, I can't speak. It's saying, this is how I communicate, this is what I like, this is how you can interact with me. So it's kind of quite a useful an interesting tool. Some of them are paper-based. I've seen others that are CD-ROMs. I've seen all sorts of different versions of these passports. Okay. And then moving on to advocacy, because I found out just last night that you possibly don't have this role in Sweden, independent advocates. And basically these are people whose job it is to enable children and young people to speak up. And they work with the young people. First of all, if they don't feel comfortable, they will find out what the young person wants them to say in meetings going on about them, and they will represent the child's view. And the idea is that they empower the young person to a point where the young person feels comfortable to express their own view. So the difference in this role is that this advocate is working for the young people. So it's almost like the young people are their boss. The young people are the leaders. And so for an advocate, they will represent and say what the child wants them to say, even if they might not necessarily agree with what they say, or they think it's in the child's best interest. They are there to represent the view of the child. So that's a role that has rolled out across England. And children, young people in care who are looked after by the government, by the state, they have a legal right to an advocate if they want to make a complaint about their services. So that's advocates. The other side of that is what we call non-instructed advocates. And this is quite interesting. That first example, I said that the young person almost instructs the advocate as to what they say on behalf of the young person. With non-instructed advocates, these are people who are working with children with the most complex needs, who might not have the ability to say, this is what I want to say, this is what I want to instruct you to say. So they're non-instructed. And the way these people work is that they will spend time with the young person, they will observe them in different settings, they will talk to people who work with young people in different settings, and they build up a picture of the young person's likes and dislikes, what makes them happy, what makes them sad, and etc. And they present that almost within a rights framework, and that's almost trying to get across what the young person would say if they could instruct the advocate. So that is something that has developed quite rapidly as well in the UK. It's quite hard to explain, so I'm publishing a report with a colleague in a month's time, which will be available from the Children's Society's website. So if you are interested in looking at that role in more detail. And then finally, just to say it's the National Year of Communication in England. And there's a website developed with lots of information that you might be interested in. It was going to be massive, actually, but the new UK government pulled the plug. So, and didn't give any funding for it, so it's much smaller than it should have been. But even so, it's a really, there's lots of activities going on at the moment around speech, language and communication. So that was my example of a talking map, but I think the ones outside are much better to look at, so I'll whiz through that. Okay. So, in drawing together all the research and information that we have around disabled children's participation in the UK, we've come up with a top 10 list of tips and ways and means to involve children and young people in decision making. And I think I've probably covered all of that in what I've said. So accept children communicate in different ways, find out how they communicate, provide accessible information, focus on what they can do and not what they can't do. Don't assume that some methods are better than others. Make it fun and relevant. Try different methods. Be flexible. Try to build a culture of participation. By that we mean involving children in decisions at all levels and all the time and every day so that they start to learn the skills. And I'd say just give it a go, really. Then I have to give the last word to the young people. They said to me that, oh, it's great you're going on a conference, Anita, it's brilliant, it's great. But then what? What are those people going to do? you need to ask them some questions so that after the conference they go away and do something. So these are the questions that they came up with. It wasn't enough that I talked, they don't trust me, they want you to do something. So they wanted me to ask you to think about the barriers that you might be creating to participation. They want to know what accessible information that you have available for other disabled children and young people. They want to know what choices you can give, what questions you can ask. And then they're very clever. They said, just ask them, what decisions would they want to be involved in their life? Just so you start to think about all the decisions you make every day. How would you feel if someone else dressed you in the morning or decided what you were going to eat every day? So that's what they wanted to say. They wanted to ask, can you give time to young people, and are you willing to give it a go? So I think that probably sums up what they want to say. And then I'll leave you with, it's a very long quote, but this quote from a young person has appeared, I think, in every publication that since it was written about participation for disabled young people. I think it sums up what we're trying to achieve, really. Like I say, that's on everything, so you will see that if you download anything from the Disability Toolkit. Okay, that's my contact details, and I've put all the websites and useful addresses on the PowerPoint, and also all the references that I've mentioned, and I guess people will be able to get hold of this at some point. As I appreciate I've said quite a lot, quite fast in English. So I apologise for that. I hope that you'll take the time to look at some of this at a later date. Thank you.